welcome to everybody. I've been meaning to do this for a while. I wanted to create pretty much a character creation slash tutorial for people who are trying to get into the Fallout series or Fallout 4 in particular. And this is something that's like just a fun project I wanted to do for a while, and hopefully the game it came out in 2015, so it's an older game now. I think the last downloadable content upgrades for this game came out in 2017. So this is an older game, but people are still playing it, which is awesome. Fallout is my favorite gaming franchise by far. There's been Fallout 1, Fallout 2, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout Tactics, Fallout 4, obviously, and then, of course, Fallout 76, which is the massive multiplayer online game, which had mixed reviews. Now, today what I'm going to do is basically start kind of easing people into this, and how I'm going to do this is to start off by just showing you character creation, and when I do this, I'm going to explain why that we create characters the way we do in this game, and how you could be more successful with certain builds versus how you can make things actually a lot harder if that's what you're aiming for, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to load pretty much something that I had saved from a long time ago. I have a whole bunch of characters I've created in this game. Over the years, I've done characters. Sometimes I use mods just for fun, and then of course when I don't use mods, these characters are like level 50, level 60, and so on. I'm going to start off with a character I created a long time ago. I just called this one Natasha. Don't ask me why. I guess it's because of my obsession with Soviet spies or something. I don't know. Who cares? But anyway, I'm going to load this game up, which basically this character starts off with the entire opening sequence of Fallout 4 being completed. So you're getting ready to kind of venture out into the world. But right before you exit this vault where your character has been basically stuck for all these years, these 2 centuries that you've been asleep, you can actually recustomize your character. It'll actually say to you, do you want this to be your character? And if not, let's modify the character's appearance, and let's modify their statistics and all that fun stuff, which is what I'm going to do just to show you what we can do and why that we would do this for these characters. Now, one thing you will need to keep in mind is that Fallout 1 and 2, as well as Fallout Tactics, these were turn-based role-playing games. They came out in 1997 and 1998. And as a role-playing game, they're not like they were based on what's called an isometric RPG. So the characters had to move like chess pieces, pretty much. You moved your chess pieces forward. Then you got like an action phase where your character got to engage in combat or dialogue or pick locks or something. And you only had a certain number of action points to get through. Now, Fallout 4 and Fallout 3 for that matter, and in Fallout New Vegas, the whole format of Fallout changed. They essentially made this like a first-person shooter where you actually can move around like I'm doing right now with my character. I can actually zoom out. You can actually see what my character currently looks like. It is female. Of course, I gave her some glasses. She's got red hair. Then I can go back to first-person view here. But the whole franchise changed when Bethesda essentially bought the rights to Fallout, and they created this environment. But the thing you have to remember is Fallout is still a role-playing game. It is still based on the original rules that were placed in Fallout 1 and 2. So you still have the same stat lines that you have to work with in order to do this. So in other words, if you don't create the right stats, you can go about this game playing it like a first-person shooter, which is what a lot of people did when this game came out, not knowing what it would do. And they might encounter an extreme degree of difficulty or not much success because they thought, well, if I just create a character that goes around and bashes people over the head with a baseball bat, I can have fun with this. It'll be just like Doom, except with baseball bats. And it's like, no, that's not how it works, because your enemies will counter that by throwing hand grenades at you and stuff, and they will also flank you and do other things that are unexpected. So you can't just go into Fallout 3 or 4 or Fallout New Vegas thinking it's a standard first-person shooter. You have to actually think about this in terms of how the game was meant to be played, which is like a tactics-based. So as I said, I'm getting ready to leave the vault here, and then it'll say, do you want to change anything? Change name, special attributes, change appearance, finish, exit the vault. So what I'm going to do is go into change name and characteristics. So I named my character Natasha, which, as I said, it's a joke on Boris and Natasha from Bullwinkle. So here are your statistics. They call it special, S-P-E-C-I-A-L, special. It's like an acronym which stands for all these things. Now, right now, I have Natasha. I gave her 8 for perception, 2 for strength, and of course the scale goes from 1. Let me reduce the stats here so I can jack this up to about 10. 10, pretty much you go from 10, which is like the maximum stat you can give yourself, to 1. Now, in the old Fallout games, Fallout 1 and 2, I'm being very specific here, if you gave your character an intelligence of 1, the dialogue in the game was actually hilarious because your character pretty much was, well, literally almost mentally challenged. I mean, the people would ask you questions and your character would be like, me no understand, and your enemies in the game or people you interact with could actually fool your character and play around with you, and you wouldn't have actually access to many dialogue options. So it made the game very difficult, especially in Fallout 1, if you made your character's intelligence 1, because you're basically like this dopey person going around, and everybody's trying to deceive you, and it's no fun. If you maxed out your intelligence, on the other hand, you can literally play the game Fallout 1 and beat the entire game without even engaging in combat even once. You could literally walk through the entire game. I've seen people do it with an intelligence stat of 10 and the agility stat of 10 and everything else being nothing. And I've seen people actually beat the game. Seriously. Which is interesting. It's like a speed run, but it is possible to do that. The same thing can be said in Fallout 2. You can actually, based on how you choose your stats, you can actually walk through the game and be like a pacifist, and you don't really fight anything or draw a weapon on anybody. You can actually kind of talk your way through. However, I'm not going to spoil the game for you. That makes your final scenario in Fallout 2 insanely difficult. So I would not recommend being the pacifist route in Fallout 2, but you can do it in Fallout 1 for sure. So with Fallout 3 and 4, as I said, when Bethesda bought the rights to the franchise, they changed everything. I mean, they made this like a first-person shooter, so essentially you have to think they want you to go around the game playing it like a first-person shooter, but as I said, you got to remember this game is still a role-playing game. You still have to keep in mind that things are going to be thrown at you that are not related to what you would traditionally find in any kind of shooter game, okay? Now, if I wanted to create a character, an archetype, so to speak, that is like a barbarian or a fighter or somebody that likes to get up and close and personal and to beat up my opponents with my fists or some sort of melee weapon, you definitely have to have the highest strength you can possibly have, okay? I don't recommend, in Fallout 4, I do not recommend people who are new to the game or inexperienced go about creating a character like this, okay? Simply because it makes the game much, much more difficult for you. Okay, now for someone like me, yeah, I would play as a barbarian or some sort of a fighter person, just to go around beating up enemies with my fists or some sort of melee weapon. Simply because, I mean, it just makes it fun. It makes it more challenging, and at a higher difficulty, it's really interesting because you have to close the distance on a lot of enemies, and most of your enemies in Fallout 4 are using guns, and they also throw grenades at you. So getting up and close and personal to them is extremely difficult. So the other stat you would think by default would be the endurance stat. So if I wanted to create like a barbarian and I want to get up in someone's business really quickly to beat them up, I would probably need my endurance stat to also be maxed out because I need to have a lot of hit points and I need to have a lot of agility, or sorry, not agility, but the ability to close the distance between myself and an opponent without getting killed. So, in other words, I'm basically, to be as unrealistic as possible, your character has to run towards somebody with a gun, and usually the people shooting at you have automatic weapons, so you're running straight towards them to basically hit them. So thinking about that, you're going to be absorbing some damage to get close to them. So you would think that increasing your endurance to that statistic would be the right thing to do, and it is. Now, the only other thing here, obviously, as I kind of hinted to, like a Freudian slip, is that, yeah, I would also need my agility to be as high as possible, but here it only goes up to 4 because I've used up all my stats. So here I have a character that can get really, really close to you and absorb a ton of punishment to kind of beat you over the head with their fists or some sort of melee weapon, and they also are agile, so they're kind of quick at how fast they get to you. So this is not the most ideal way of going about this. Like what I would have probably done if this were my character, I'd probably drop this down to 8. Now I'd increase this to 6 or something higher than that. I'd probably drop this down a couple points because you don't really need things to be maxed out in this game, because you get a lot of perks in this game that actually will max out your stats no matter what. So you don't really need to give yourself a maximum statistic in Fallout 3 or in Fallout 4, because you're gonna have what's called buffs, where basically you can take drugs and stuff that'll make your character's strength and endurance go way up. You also will find what's called bobbleheads, which will also automatically, by default, increase your stats by 1 point. And at any time during the game when you level up, you can also increase your stats however you want them to be as well, though I don't recommend that. I recommend you use your level up perk options to actually choose perks, not to use it on actually increasing your base statistics like this, okay? So as I said, if this were my character and I wanted to create like a barbarian or melee fighter, whatever you want to call them, I'd probably do like an 8 here. Obviously, an intelligence of 1 is not going to do very well for you in this game because it makes leveling up very, very slow. You'll have to kill a lot of enemies. You'll have to compete virtually every single quest in the game in order to gain levels, as you would normally expect. So I would probably put, a little more intelligence into this, and then voila, that would be like my melee fighter if I were playing this game. Now, as I said, if you're new to Fallout and you desperately want to create a character that's a melee fighting character, I would recommend that you do this, but do not go above. I would not go into the extreme difficulties in this game, meaning I would not play this on hardcore. I would not play this on the very hard setting or the hard setting. I would play this on either easy or normal if you are new to this franchise, because I can tell you right now, you're probably going to be crying and you're going to be very upset because you're going to die a lot with this type of character, okay? Now, the traditional Fallout games in Fallout 1 and 2, they were built on, as I said, the isometric role-playing game platform. So, like a chess piece, they only got a certain amount of moves that a person could do per turn. So everything was turn-based. So your character would move, and during that turn where your character is moving like a chess piece, you also had the option to conduct an action during that phase. So you can move however many spaces to get close to a person, get away from a person, and during that time you also had those same action points which are distributed to you to also engage in combat. So in other words, in order for you to survive the first 2 Fallout games, and this applies to both of them, you really literally had to increase your agility to 10. I mean, that was the only way to do it. I mean, you could play the game with a lower agility than that, but it was insanely difficult because all of your opponents, you would actually encounter enemies on the screen. You'd have 5 enemies after you, and it would just be you, and you had 5 action points to spend. So you had literally 5 little spaces you can run away from to get away from the bad guys, or stand there in place and engage in shooting the bad guy or punching them. And usually when you shot or punched the bad guy, that consumed 2 or 3 action points. So in other words, if you had 5 action points and it was your turn, okay, here's a bad guy coming towards you, I have a pistol in my hand, and to shoot the pistol cost me 3 action points. Well, I can only shoot once during that phase. Now, the 5 enemies there, they're going to be shooting at me too. And they have, I don't know, their statistic levels aren't known to me unless you have a certain perk that knows that. So they're all shooting at you. They all get 5 turns to shoot at you during that round. And based on your character, you're probably going to die. Because they're going to kill you in 1 turn. Because 5 characters versus you, and you only have 5 points to spend, you can't even run away from those guys. You're pretty much doomed. So you pretty much what you would do is maximize your agility stat, because you can at least escape from almost any situation in both games, and you can also pretty much engage in several turns of shooting. Like you could shoot your pistol 3 or 4 times, or shoot your shotgun or whatever weapon you had 3 or 4 times. So you can actually take out those 5 enemies. You can probably, even it out pretty quick, depending on how good you are at the game. So in the old games, this would be an absolute necessity. Like anybody who didn't give themselves a 10 for their agility stat was just stupid. I mean, it just made the game that much more difficult. Now, this isn't, though, obviously, this is not Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, so you do not need to max out your agility stat. However, agility still affects the number of what's called VATS, which is your still, even though this is like a shooter game, you still have an ability to basically freeze time and go into a turn-based mode where you can actually target your opponents, and that's called VATS, okay? The higher your agility score, the more VATS points you have. So when I freeze time and I choose to shoot all the enemies on the screen, the more agility points I have, the more times I can shoot all these people on the screen and target them specifically. So in this game, it works to your advantage to have a very high agility score, okay? Also, if you're a person that as another archetype I will get to in a few minutes, if you're one of these people that likes to be like a ninja or a sniper or somebody that likes to hide and sneak around and stuff, the agility stat is also extremely important to you. Because the higher the agility, the higher the likelihood your enemies aren't going to see you or find you when you're trying to sneak around them. So for those characters who like to do that, that's why your agility stat would be, you'd want it to be very, very high. Now, for those of you who are new to Fallout, what I would recommend, and I'm going to just kind of shift gears here, I'm going to drop everything down to 1 just to show you. The easiest way to play Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 is very similar to the way you would play Fallout 1 and 2, meaning that you want to have a high enough agility score where your character has a lot of points to spend for VATS, okay? But you also want to make sure that perception is relatively high, because in a lot of these games, especially Fallout 2, you were basically relying on your ability to engage in opponents from a distance. So the higher the perception score you had, the sooner you can detect bad guys, and pretty much also, well, the sooner you can detect danger, I guess that's the way to say, because that applies to all Fallout games. So the higher the perception score through Fallout 1 through Fallout 4, it doesn't matter, the higher your perception score, the easier it is for you to detect danger. Okay, so if there's a bad guy running up on you, the higher the perception score, you can detect them sooner. Okay, so obviously if you were a character that likes to use guns, which I strongly recommend for everybody who's new to Fallout to do, you want a perception stat that's relatively high, because that makes it easier for you to target the bad guys, okay? So, the 2 stats that you can't underestimate if you were a new Fallout player are your perception and your agility stats, okay? These 2 are the ones you should be primarily focused with, in my opinion, if you are new to this franchise, okay? Now, you have all these other stats here. Now, if you're not going to engage in melee combat, you're not going to want to like fight people with bare fists or with melee weapons. The strength could be basically what you consider a dump stat for that category. So if you're a character that doesn't engage in melee combat and you're not planning on doing anything like that, strength pretty much becomes a dump stat where you don't really care what it is. I almost never have it at 1, simply because that's silly. Your character can still carry around a lot of junk, so you don't really need to have this very, very high, and the effect on that isn't as extreme as you'd think. So I wouldn't really worry about strength if you're going to be using guns and you're going to be sneaking around and doing all that stuff. So it's not really that big a deal. The same thing with endurance, simply because, to me, endurance has always been a dump stat for me in this game, because I create these little nimble characters that have high perception, and I don't plan on getting close to my enemies. So I like to kill my enemies from a distance in this game, so I basically become like a sniper. So my endurance stat, I kind of drop it down, because I don't really rely on that sort of thing anyway. Now, charisma and luck. These are the traditional dump stats that people always talk about in the other Fallout games. This is up to you. This is entirely up to you how you want to do this. If you're a person who basically relies on speech checks on on non-player characters, NPCs. This would be something you would invest in, okay? For me, you can actually play Fallout 4 and beat the entire game without really relying on building settlements, because it's not really relevant to what you could to the actual story of the game. It doesn't really matter that much. So if you're one of these people that's new to Fallout, I really wouldn't pay too much attention to charisma if that's just not your thing. Like a second or third time you play this game through, after you've played the story and all that, maybe give yourself some charisma points and build a settlement and have fun with that. That's up to you. But for the most part, charisma, the only thing that really, affects me in this game, Fallout 4 specifically, I like to use I don't like to keep charisma at 1, simply because it makes your ability to trade, like your barter, as it's called, where you actually trade in goods of things that you encounter. Like you could sell stuff, like you could sell armor, you could sell guns, you could sell ammo, you can sell food. It makes it that much harder to sell the items and get the maximum value of those items in here. So if you're like one of these people that loves the stock market and loves to do day trading and all that, you're going to have fun with charisma. You can also convince people and threaten people and coerce them, and charisma, a high statistic for that, would be good for that sort of thing. However, how many speech checks are you going to have in this game? Not that many that are really that relevant, because this game, unfortunately, is geared more towards combat, which is sad, because you can, as I mentioned before, you can actually play the entire Fallout 1 game without engaging in any combat at all, which is actually really funny. This game is more combat-oriented than anything else. There are situations in this game where you literally can't avoid combat. You are either going to kill or be killed. And you can't talk your way out of it or run away. So charisma is only going to get you so far in this game. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So use this statistic at your own risk, okay? Now, intelligence is a big one, because intelligence, basically the higher your intelligence is in all of the Fallout games, it doesn't matter, the more experience points you earn every time you level up. And needless to say, you want to have this relatively high as well, because you get to level up very, very quickly. So every time you pick a lock, or steal from somebody, or kill a bad guy, or talk your way out of a situation, you're going to gain more experience every time this happens. So the higher the intelligence, the better off it's going to be. So that's always a good thing. Okay? The lower the intelligence, the slower it's going to be for you to level up. That's just the bottom line. So I would never underestimate your intelligence statistic under any situation in any of the Fallout games, okay? However, once again, you do not need to max this out, because that's just silly. You have chances of buffing the statistic and increasing it through bobbleheads and other things where you don't really need to. You don't need to do that. You don't need to have a 10 as a starting statistic in this game. It really doesn't make much sense. Unless you're really desperate to dominate in a certain category and you want to level up really, really fast for whatever reason, go for it. But as I said, if you're a new Fallout player, I mean, I would keep your intelligence relatively high. It's also going to make your ability to hack computers easier, and that sort of stuff. So it's not that bad. Luck is the other stat where I literally will tell you it's up to you in this game, okay? For a new Fallout player, it's really up to you if you want your luck statistic to be 1. Doesn't matter if your luck is actually 1. Does that mean that I'm going to be encountering all sorts of bad things that happen to my character throughout the game? In Fallout 4, it's not as relevant, okay? Now, Fallout 1 and 2, if your luck statistic was nothing, it sucked, because you had a lot more random encounters with bad guys, and sometimes you would actually be like shooting at the bad guys and you'd miss. So a low luck setting in that game really, really was bad for you. In this game, it's not really as relevant, okay? They're just simple perks that you can use with luck that will kind of help you out a little bit. So if I want to create a character that has the ability to find more bottle caps that are stashed, or find more ammunition, or use the mysterious stranger perk, it's all dependent on perks, okay? So I really can't say to you, one way or the other what you should do with your stat here, okay? So what I'm going to do, because I'm kind of just explaining to you all the archetypes. Like, this would be like an archetype. I would almost say that this person's like an intelligent sniper person. So what I would do here is I'd maybe make that a 2. I'd give this a 2, and that would be like my archetypal sniper. Now, I could play with this a little bit. Let's say I want to be someone that's very uncharismatic, but I want to be even more of a sniper that can kill enemies from afar. This is what I would do. Okay? Pretty much this is what I would recommend for that. As I said, if I wanted to be the wild barbarian that likes to get up in people's face and hit them with melee weapons or pummel them with my fists, then yes, I would have to, modify this a little bit, to make your endurance high, your strength high, and you would basically have to, depending on how fast you want to level up, this is entirely up to you. How you would do this. But I wouldn't recommend keeping your agility low when you're actually a melee character, because you can't close the distance as well as you want. And of course, perception, if you're a melee character, this might actually be your dump stat for this, as well as charisma. You can also forego luck, because who cares when you're a melee character. So in that case, you might actually increase your agility to 6 or something like that. So that's an archetype for you. As I said, as a new player, I don't recommend the melee archetype. I think you should be like a sniper, or you should be like someone that likes to sneak around. You can also do a well-balanced character. It's entirely up to you. Although, for the newbies out there, this is, once again, all 4s in every category. Yeah, you're balanced, but you're also not really good at anything either. You're kind of like mediocre in almost every category, and you don't need to do this. I don't recommend you do this as a rookie or as an experienced player, because it makes no sense unless you want to challenge yourself. As I said, that's up to you. So what I'm going to do here, since I pretty much laid it out to you why we choose these numbers for these categories, I'm going to go ahead and pretty much create the archetypal character that I would play in this game. So I would drop that down. I'd probably increase my intelligence, my agility, and this. Do I really need charisma of 2? I'm just going to leave it there. I don't really care. I'm going to drop my endurance down, and I might bump this up. Oh, jeez, it's really up to me, isn't it? See, decisions, right? Just go with endurance of 2, okay? So here's my character that I'm going to create. Now what I'm going to do is basically move on to perks. And I promised myself I'd keep this video to about 30 minutes, so I'm running out of time. But pretty much all I was doing with part 1 of this is just explaining the character build, like why we would choose these statistics that we were doing, okay? That's just a summary of this entire video. It depends on how you want to play. And as I said, as a rookie character, someone that's a noob basically to Fallout, I would recommend you create a character that's very good at killing things from a distance, okay? So a person that's really good with guns. And you're like a sniper, pretty much. And you want to be like a sneaky sniper, too. That's if you want to do really well in this game, okay? You don't really want to engage in enemies face-to-face or close to them. You want to be a character that because there's a lot of combat in this game, you want to be able to kill your enemies from a distance. And you also want to be able to have a reasonable intelligence setting on here that you level up at a really good pace. That way you get to take advantage of all of the perks that are available. Now, if you don't want to do that, I mean, the other way you can go about this, in all honesty, if you don't want your intelligence to be that high, then I would recommend you put something into charisma then. Because then you're going to talk your way out of a lot of situations that your intelligence won't be able to get out of. But that's, as I said, entirely up to you how you would play this. And that's really all I had to say for today. I just wanted to give you all a part 1 on why we choose these statistics, how it relates to the previous Fallout games, and hopefully this is something that you all would find interesting, those of you who are just getting into this franchise. I mean, the games are a hell of a lot of fun, so what do you have to lose? I mean, come on, play these games. They're fun, all right? So, anyway, until next time, have a good day.